Welcome to the podcast, Kate. I am thrilled to have you here. Just excited to have this conversation. I'm very hopeful for our listeners to learn a lot of great information that, before I pressed record that I have had to unlearn. And I'm sure, you're going to share in your story that you did as well. So let's just jump in with that. I came to know you via a podcast, and then I got your book and read through it and loved it. So I'd love for you to share just a little bit about yourself and how you got to the work that you do today.
Yeah, no problem. And first, thanks for having me here. Well, my journey to kind of this sphere was when I was probably about 38, 39, and I thought I was doing everything right. I ate a very clean diet. At the time, it was probably fairly low carbohydrates, because I think at the time we all thought carbohydrates were somewhere the devil. It certainly wasn't going to help with any sort of fat loss. And my vision was always trying to get as lean as possible and as fit looking as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially, my health started to go south, and that kind of looked like I wasn't recovering as well. I wasn't sleeping as well.
Mm-hmm.
I started having some hormonal issues, period issues, and I at the time just thought, well, I'm approaching 40, maybe this is just how it is. And that's when I started to learn about, essentially relearning about physiology and how food it functions within that. And I started to learn that I was essentially not fueling my system, and I was just basically running on stress. And of course we can do that for probably a few decades and be okay until we can't. And then we're basically, trying to push a very heavy car up a hill that's not on. And we continue to do it. And I did it. I had fantastic willpower. I had fantastic commitment, and it just wasn't working any longer. And so that's when my process of unlearning everything I thought was correct started. And since then, it's been a much easier journey.
I mean, I really feel like you just described so many women in America right now. And I too really prided myself on willpower and discipline, and, I'm sure left other people thinking, why can't I have as much discipline as she has? There's just this, it's just such a thing that our culture kind of glorifies, I think. So much I'm excited to unpack in this episode. But as I mentioned, I really would like to kind of dig into the sugar topic, because so many come to me and they say, I'm addicted to sugar. I can't get off of sugar. And I humbly have learned that sugar is not the enemy. Our body needs sugar. But as we kind of have this conversation, maybe why does our body need sugar? But what are the right kinds? Because there are a lot of processed kinds now. So these are all things that I'd love for us to kind of talk about.
Yeah. So probably to start it off, because I think people hear the word sugar and they just think you've said the most horrible word on the planet, right, and it's just poison. And so we have to give context to sugar. And so sugar is essentially just basic glucose and fructose. And so it is a simple sugar that our bodies, or that we see in nature. We can see it in cane sugar or beet sugar. And that's the kind of the most basic type. Right now, nobody is sitting here telling you should eat copious amounts of white sugar and all is going to be well. Sugar is actually quite metabolic. It actually helps support metabolism. The problem with most sugar, just in the blatant terms of just white sugar, is it doesn't have any nutritional content. Doesn't mean it's bad. Right. It doesn't mean it doesn't have purpose. It just doesn't have nutrition. And anytime you want to increase someone's metabolic rate, you need to make sure all the cofactors are coming along with it. And that means all the nutrition. Because again, when we speed things up, we speed the usage of all basically minerals and nutrients that go with it. Right. So that means that we want to consume sugars that have a lot of nutrition. And that looks like fruits and roots and dairy and milk and honey, and these things that we know we're going to get both things and provide us with good energy and also with nutrition. Now, again, doesn't mean that white sugars are necessarily bad. It can be utilized quite purposefully for a lot of different reasons. It's actually very easy to digest. It can provide you with good energy. But again, it doesn't have a lot of nutrition. So other things can start showing up if you consume copious amounts. Now, most people are not just consuming spoonfuls of white sugar. They're eating other foods that contain sugar, like cookies and cakes and all these sweet foods that are not just sugar. They also contain some polyunsaturated fats. They also contain grains or other foods in there. They're just highly caloric, highly palatable foods that we can totally overeat. And it's
Yeah.
that overconsumption that creates the problem. So is it the sugar that's a problem? Like probably
Mhm.
because those foods are sweet, we think that that's the sugar and that is the problem. But we
Right.
need to kind of go away from that and say, okay, is it just the sugar that's creating the problem? And usually the answer is no. And in fact, it's
Mhm.
the restriction of the sugar that is creating the problem because
Yeah.
our bodies run on glucose, which is basically sugar broken down, that when we try to restrict our most basic energy,
Mhm.
our innate functions and are going to start screaming at us to start consuming fuel. And
Yeah.
so when we restrict it and then we need it, we will overconsume it. It's kind of that
Mm.
rebound effect. And that's
Yeah.
usually most people's story. And it was certainly mine when I would
Mhm.
try to restrict it all day and then I would go like work out and work all day and try to do all that on very little fuel.
Mhm.
Eventually, my body was like, hey, start screaming. And I would overconsume, whether it would be in the evening or if I gritted
Yeah.
it out for a week or two, I would certainly overconsume in a week or two. And that would end up
Mhm.
being some sort of crazy binge or whatnot that would kind of just never let me move forward on a lot of things. So it was a
Yeah.
lot of hanging on by my fingernails a lot, was grinding through things
Mhm.
because my body was so out of balance and wasn't being properly fueled through the day by their most basic source of energy.
When you were saying all of those or some of those things, I was thinking how black and white we think now. Like and really it probably, I was also thinking about, our, maybe even my parents or grandparents, we just didn't have all of this processed foods that were available to us. Like they ate more whole foods that contained sugar and it wasn't a problem. Like you didn't really hear about these things back then. And it's really only been probably in the last, I don't know, 20 or 30 years that we've really had this issue of binging and, having all of these sweet processed things available. So I really think you have to look at it from a little bit of a wider lens versus just saying sugar is bad, don't eat any sugar, because like you said, our body runs off of it. And one other thing that you said at the very beginning was you have to think about biology. This isn't just your opinion. This is how our body actually works. Correct?
Yes, absolutely. Your cells prefer to use glucose as energy, right? We have
Yeah.
something called blood sugar. Blood sugar runs through our system. We like to keep it
Mm-hmm.
between a certain range. That's where our body has optimal homeostasis. It's right, it kind of feels happy, right? We've all heard about your blood sugar getting too low and you need to have some sugar.
Yeah.
Obviously, we've seen it in certain diagnosis where diabetes or something that your blood sugar gets too
Mm-hmm.
high. But when we can maintain our blood sugar, we feel pretty good. And
Yeah.
it's not blood fat or blood protein that does that. It is blood sugar. And the only way we can regulate that is through glucose. Now,
Yeah.
you always hear this argument that, hey, your body doesn't need sugar because it can produce its own. And that is correct. It can produce its own. And actually, it is one of the nutrients you don't need to survive. You can go zero sugar. You can go on a keto based genic diet and have no sugar, and your body can totally survive. That is absolutely correct because your body will produce its own sugar through a process called gluconeogenesis, where it breaks
Right.
down protein or muscles and so forth and makes its own. Now, cool that your body does that because your body's number one job is to keep you alive. So,
Right.
but that's how important sugar is to the system. Your body has a process that will break
Mm.
down your own muscle to create its own sugar because it needs it to survive, right? And so we have to remember that there are certain
Yeah.
body functions or body organs that only can utilize sugar as energy. Your
Mm-hmm.
brain is probably one. Your brain can certainly use ketones if it goes into that massive survival state, but
Yeah.
it definitely prefers to use glucose. And the red blood cells can only use glucose. And your liver, that basically that also needs glucose to run and to do a lot of
Mm-hmm.
its processes. So we have to just say, hey, look, we have this entire process to protect us that our body's doing to make its own. Why would we want to break down our own tissue when we can just easily consume it
Right.
ourselves to regulate us? And it's very muscle preserving. We do know that. So you don't lose
Mm-hmm.
muscle, because how many of us have done that? We just kind of run on a treadmill because we're burning our
Yeah.
own muscle tissue and not allowing our system to make it. So there's
Yeah.
just important things we have to
Mm-hmm.
remember about this very important macronutrient we'll refer to as carbohydrates, that
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't make sense to eliminate it. And the problems only started when we started to say, hey, we're all consuming too much of this. right? And it wasn't necessarily sugar, it was the foods that contained sugar that also contained a lot of
Right.
other crap. It probably happened in the 80s and 90s when everybody went severely low fat and and everything became processed carbohydrates, low fat stuff.
Mm.
Now, again, I'm not even saying a low fat diet is particularly bad, it's not. But a low fat diet built on processed foods that are just crappy carbohydrates and maybe low fat and not enough
Mhm.
protein and so forth is not going to
Right.
be an ideal diet, and it's going to start creating problems.
Yeah, I just think that we do think we can like biohack the system or something. It's like God made our body one way, but we're just going to try to push it a little bit. For
Sure.
some reason, I feel like we just always want to do that. Um, but it really does go back to the way it was designed, and wouldn't we want to feel it that way versus making it have to go through this whole other process just for our body to keep running. And you're right, it is. Would you rather just survive, or do you actually want to feel good? Would you rather be consumed with being, ripped and having this toned physique, or do you just want to feel good? It's not that you necessarily, it's just kind of, we have these things in our mind that we want no matter what, and we're going to go get it. And we're just going to
Yeah.
leave everything else by the wayside.
Yeah, and it's not to say that you can't have both. You can certainly support your body metabolically
Mm-hmm.
and eventually get a lean and muscular body. And there
Yeah.
certainly can do that, right? But to
Mm-hmm.
do it properly, right, you can
Yeah.
certainly remove a complete macronutrient and you eat some fat and protein and do it. But usually you find in time that A isn't a sustainable approach. It's a very hard approach to keep up with.
Mm-hmm.
But essentially, especially for women, they start having a lot of hormonal issues on that kind of diet. We
Yeah.
have to understand where carbohydrates are utilized in your system,
Mm-hmm.
and why they are so important, right? We need
Yeah.
sugar for our liver. We need sugar to support thyroid conversion. We
Mm-hmm.
need liver to help detoxify. I mean, we need
Yeah.
carbohydrates to help detoxify us. There's so many important functions that this nutrient does that if we remove it and we try to stress our system to create our own, we start seeing dysfunction. So when
Yeah.
people actually start consuming, again, the right types, no one's saying consume, cups of sugar,
Right.
but it is also saying that that isn't wrong. But I'm just saying that when we do it throughout the day, consume
Mm-hmm.
adequate amounts of carbohydrates throughout the day and support it with enough protein and maybe some fat, and we help balance our blood sugar, which is so very
Mm-hmm.
important for homeostasis, we
Yeah.
definitely are going to start feeling a lot better.
And I do think, you mentioned in your own story, okay, you started kind of feeling this way and kind of hitting a plateau or a wall at about 40. And I see that a lot. I'm about to be 40. I work with a lot of clients that are around this age. And it's like, oh, we just feel like everybody tells us our body falls apart at 40. But yet, the things that you mentioned that healthy sugar supports, hormone balance, our liver. I find that a lot of the people that come to me, their liver is not working properly, and that's what's causing a lot of the issues. So it just makes a lot of sense. Now, I would like to discuss what are the proper types of sugar, because I know that's probably what people are wondering. What types of sugar, or that would kind of go into carbohydrates a little bit. What should we be consuming that is best?
Yeah, well, I mean, and understand when certainly when I'm referencing sugar, it's like a bigger term because I use it interchangeably with usually carbohydrates, because they
Yeah.
all break down into the same thing, right? All sugars are
Right.
going to end up breaking down into glucose, and that is basically what your body uses as energy. It has blood
Mm-hmm.
glucose, or they might say blood sugar levels, but glucose is what your cells use to provide energy to your system. That is what your cells prefer, and that's what they will run best on.
Yeah.
So all carbohydrates will break down into that. Now, that doesn't mean they're all created equal. Certainly, like I said, fruits, because they have a super high nutritional
Mm-hmm.
uh, content, are going to be more beneficial. And the other thing about fruits is they're easy for your system to break down. When we are in a compromised state, what I see a lot, and I'm probably you do too, is a lot of
Mm-hmm.
GI dysfunction.
Yeah.
And that happens because when our system is under any sort of stress, the GI system, because it's very integrated into our sympathetic and parasympathetic state, starts to
Mm-hmm.
shut down, right? Our
Yeah.
digestion works best in this parasympathetic state, this resting state. And
Mm-hmm.
so when we are in this chronic stress state, which usually comes with people not consuming enough carbohydrates, the GI system doesn't work very well. And so if
Yeah.
we start continually trying to eat foods that are super taxing or take a lot of work for them to be broken down, right? Because
Mhm.
again, everything in our body runs on energy. We
Yeah.
can't do anything without fuel. It doesn't run on air or water or any of these things. It
Mhm.
needs energy. It's the gasoline that makes things go. And so if you're compromised and you just start eating other foods that might be more taxing, and this could be the starches, or a lot of grains or beans, that takes
Yeah.
your body a lot of fuel to just break that down.
Mhm.
And so if you are lacking in fuel because you are starting to have dysfunction, then we want to make sure that your body gets these foods that don't take a lot of work. Fruits are fairly easy to break
Yeah.
down. They're in simple sugar form. And so we don't need a lot of work to do that. Some are going to be
Mhm.
more challenging than others, right? And it all depends on your state of health, on what you can manage. So if
Right.
you're really compromised, sometimes it's, cook the fruit, making sure that it's kind of really sweet fruit, and or
Mhm.
even juices for some people is what might work better, what best for them. Now, that
Yeah.
doesn't mean go out and just drink copious amounts of these things and everything's going to fix. That's not, these foods always need to be balanced too, because we certainly don't
Mhm.
want to rush our system with tons of sugar at one time, especially if we can't
Right.
handle that. But as far as a digestibility level, your fruits, your juices, those are all really good sources.
Mhm.
Kind of root vegetables can be good too. A really well cooked potato. Some grains can work okay, preferably things like sourdough bread or masa harina, because they're really a lot easier, again, to digest.
Right.
Those are also going to be based on the person. Some people don't do well with starches at all because they are going to be more taxing on the system.
Mm.
And
Okay.
then, of course, using milk, because that also has sugar in it as well, if the person can tolerate it, is a really good food.
Mhm.
Again, a really stressed system, where somebody that hasn't consumed milk in a while, maybe not a good food for them because they might not be able to break it down. Maybe they're not producing the enzyme for a number of
Yeah.
different reasons. So you kind of have to gauge where that
Mhm.
person is. But my theory is always, hey, find out what you're currently doing and then start adding these foods in really slowly to see how well
Yeah.
you can tolerate them, and then go from there. This is not A to Z kind of approach. It's
Mhm.
not, here's a plan, do it and you're going to be fixed. It's a, see where you're at, and then slowly continually move through it. It's an adaptation process, because we
Mhm.
probably have adapted to a more stressed state, and now
Yeah.
we have to remove you out of that.
Definitely. And I think the digestibility part is huge because I mean, the majority of people now have a compromised digestive system. It kind of just depends on how compromised that is. But, as you were saying that, the whole approach to pro metabolic, I think, is a little bit hard for people to understand because they want a perfect plan that's going to work for them. You can't, you mean, you know, it's really so individualized. And two, it's like, this black and white. So it's like, we haven't been eating any dairy. Oh, we're just going to just go drink a ton of milk or eat a ton of yogurt. I mean, that's not going to be good either for your system. It really does have to be, everybody wants a quick fix. Most people, I won't say everybody, most people. I think that's the whole point behind why it's so hard to kind of grasp this whole idea.
Yeah, and I think that is the biggest shift, because we have been conditioned in our society. Everything is so quick and fast and immediate. I mean, we can
Mm-hmm.
we can go on Amazon and get a package the same day now. We don't
Right.
have to wait for a TV show to come on. It comes on all at once. I mean,
Yeah.
we have everything at our fingertips today. And so when you tell people this is going to take some time,
Yeah.
we have to level you out first, right? We need to figure out how many calories you can consume and feel okay. This is
Mm-hmm.
not a quick weight loss approach. There's none of that that's going. So you have to kind of walk away from that, right? I think when you
Yeah.
get to this approach, it's like you're kind of exhausted of going through the
That's
entire
true.
starving and then losing the weight and then putting it back on, because we all know that that approach doesn't work. That
Right.
approach is going to constantly be rebounding you back and forth like a ping pong ball. And
Mm-hmm.
so when people finally get here, they're like, okay, I'm tired. I mean, I've done that back and forth, and now I feel like crap, right?
Yeah.
And now I have all this dysfunction going on. And so I just want to feel better, because feeling like crap it's exhausting, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
people have their life they have to manage and they don't feel well. So,
Right.
this approach is like, okay, we need to kind of get you back into a healthy place. And what does that look like? That means providing you with enough fuel. It doesn't mean you're going to lose weight immediately. You can
Right.
certainly in time, once we get you more balanced, but we certainly have to focus on your symptoms first. And people
Right.
that are in a low metabolic state are going to
Mhm.
be as cold bodies, right? I don't know if anyone
Yeah.
relates to this, cold hands and feet. They're going to have really bad digestive systems, usually going to be constipated, possibly diarrhea. They could
Mhm.
be peeing like 25 times a day. That can certainly happen. They might have dry skin, dry hair, um, uh, really painful periods or missing periods or infertility issues. There's
Mhm.
a lot of different things. All of those things are showing you the state of your metabolism. And if all those like,
Yeah.
yep, got all those, I'm like, yeah, okay, well then you probably
Yeah.
you're probably not healthy enough to go into a weight loss program, right?
Mhm.
Don't lose, like I love this quote, is that you don't lose weight to get healthy, you get healthy to lose
To
weight.
lose
Okay.
weight.
Yeah.
Yes.
So anyone, and we've all done it. We have probably not been very healthy, and we've tried to lose weight again. And usually at the end of that, we feel even worse. And it's
Right.
that last approach was really usually harder to lose weight. Every time you go through that process, it gets more challenging and challenging and challenging. And
Yeah.
that is an adaptation period, right? It took you
Mhm.
years to get to that place. You did
Yeah.
something repeatedly, and you finally got to this place where your body's adapt to this kind of low metabolic, low energy state. And to pull yourself out of that, it is not a quick fix. It wasn't a quick fix to get there. So
Yeah.
now it's going to take some time to get you out, but it can certainly happen. I always say to people, if in a year from now, even if you're the same weight, but so many of your symptoms are better and you have more energy and you feel good and your mood's better. And honestly, so many people like, I don't even care. I feel so much better. Now, again, not
Right.
saying you can't lose it. You still can,
Sure.
right? People get all freaked out.
Yeah.
But you'll be starting at a much better baseline, right? And
Mhm.
so we want to build your baseline up. We want to make sure that you can consume copious amounts of calories. I mean, women should be consuming, 2,000, 2,400 calories a day to
Yeah.
maintain. And they're consuming 12 to 1,500 calories, right? But if you're consuming 2,400 calories and maintaining, if you want to lose weight, it's a lot easier to take 300, 400 calories off 2,000 than off 1,500, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, and you can maintain at 2000. If people are like, what? Yes, you can, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I'm
Mhm.
now 50. I eat more now in my 50s than I did in my 20s. And I assure you, I worked out a lot more in my 20s.
Yeah.
And because of just what I did to my system. So you can do it. It's a process to do it, but I assure you, you'll feel a lot better through the process.
Yes. And you'll be a lot happier. I think you're happier when you're better nourished, well fed. You know,
Yeah.
I do think though, I do feel that, that people like you were saying, people have to go through this whole process and they kind of come to this place of, okay, they're hearing about this, but they kind of have a hard time with trusting that this is going to work because they've tried all of these other things. They feel like crap. Well, why is this any different? And it kind of seems so counterintuitive also. Like I'm going to eat more and I'm going to feel better and I'm maybe even going to be able to get to a better weight. Like it kind of just seems way out there. Like I should be eating all these things that I've always been told not to.
Yeah, and I think that's when the unlearning comes in because you
Yeah.
have been conditioned, right? So I mean there's a lot of things we've been conditioned to in our life to think a certain way, and then but if you kept doing it that way and now you're like, well, I feel crappier and crappier every time I do this process, right? So
Right.
then maybe you have to rethink, well, maybe that's not the right way. I know I
Hmm.
felt that. I mean, I did that for, I've been in this industry for 25 years,
Yeah.
and I did the diet, extreme exercise, push myself for
Hmm.
15 of those or 20 of those. And so, it took a lot of unwinding in my brain. And even when I
Hmm.
got, I kind of kept going back and forth with it because the old brain, right, our habitual brain that likes to pull us back into what our comfort level is, would keep screaming at me like, well, this doesn't make any sense. Da, 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 da. But
Yeah.
but I would constantly be like, but this is how my physiology works, right? I can't run on air. I need fuel. I'm a busy person. I have to do all these
Hmm.
things. What am I thinking? So it is a learning process. And I think when
Yeah.
people really kind of dive in to try to understand, like, okay, that makes sense. Like you need to make sense of it.
Right.
Then you're willing to do the process. If you don't really invest a little bit of time and energy
I
into that
agree.
sense, you're going to fight it and you're going to try to go down back old brain. Old brain's going to, and that's what I can
Yeah.
see sometimes is if you aren't ready and your only mission is to lose weight, and then you're gonna just push back to the other way, right? You really need to be in a place like I'm ready to feel better and take care of myself, because so many women
Right.
haven't up to this point. They're being pulled
Yes.
in 17 different directions, and so at this point they're just tired and exhausted, and they
Yeah.
need to give themselves some space to feel better. But when you
Yes.
get there, you will, and that alone is super rewarding. But I get that, right?
Yes.
It is kind of counterintuitive,
Right.
but it also makes perfect sense at the same time.
Exactly. So this leads me right into kind of our close with, you got to read the book. Like, don't knock it until you read the book. So share a little bit about the book that you read, and just also how they can connect with you and work with you.
So yeah, well, so it's about 7 years now. I wrote a book called How to Heal Your Metabolism, based on these principles, because I went through this process, and after about 2 or 3 years, I was like trying to teach it to people, and it was like 4 sessions in where I was trying to explain everything to them. I'm like, if there was just something I could give them that would help
Right.
alleviate this, that would be so helpful. And that
Yeah.
started the adventure off me writing the book. So it was
Mhm.
like 2 years of work of just trying to make a lot of these kind of complex ideas very simplified. And so
You
it
did a
gives an,
great job.
well, thank you. So it gives you an understanding of basics of metabolism, what
Mhm.
you would see if you are in some sort of hypometabolic state,
Yeah.
why we've done certain diets and why they might not have worked, and why
Mhm.
utilizing things like carbohydrates and saturated fats and right proteins and how you kind of use those all together will help kind of heal your system. Now, it's
Yeah.
not going to be exactly for each individual, but it's certainly going to give you a really good foundation as
Yeah.
to why things haven't been working for you and why that trying these things might help support you. This
Mhm.
is what I will say, people, is not a linear healing journey. So it doesn't like you start doing it and all of a sudden everything is perfect. Depending on your state of health,
Mhm.
certain things could happen.
Yeah.
So reading the book, like I said, will at least give you a really, really, really helpful
Yeah.
foundation. You can follow me on Instagram at Kate Deering Fitness, or on Facebook, and I'm always putting out different
Mhm.
bits of information that kind of will help people through this
Right.
journey, whether it's just specifically about what to do for actually trying to get through a fat loss protocol, or why certain foods may or may not work for you even though they're good foods. So there's
Right.
lots of free information on there.
Mhm.
I also will be coming this summer. I'm finally finishing up a recipe book,
Oh,
which will give you
awesome.
tons of ideas on foods to eat, and a lot more than my book, and a lot more specific with all the macronutrient breakdowns and kind of meal
Okay.
plans in there. So everything takes time, but yes, that's finally hopefully going to come out
Yeah.
in this summer. And so I think that'll be quite helpful to people. And then you can reach me at katedeering.com is my website.
Mhm.
And yeah.
Awesome. I can attest that you have a great deal of free information on your Instagram, and I'm sure on your website too. But I just thank you for just going through the journey yourself and then wanting to do something about it, because like I have just personally learned so much about this, even in the last 6 months, and your book was a big part of that. So I really appreciate you taking the time to do that. And now I'm excited for the new recipe book. So
Awesome.
lots to be
Yep.
excited for. Thank you for having this conversation with me today. I appreciate it.
Yes, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.